This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Baked by Life is a Bitch, composed by Burning Aurora, Kellyanna, and Flowerhawk. The first time Remus stopped by the bakery, it was at the tail end of a long, frustrating day at work that had him walking home amidst a bracing autumn chill in complete silence, hands in his pockets, contemplating all the life choices that had led him to that point. When he caught the trail of a decadent scent, things suddenly seemed a little brighter. He tracked the aroma to a shop he hadn't noticed before, nestled between a small boutique and a florist. There was a sign in the window that read simply, "Baked." The transition from outside to inside was marked by the cheerful tinkling of the bell above the door and the intensifying scent of chocolate. He was met with floors of dark wood and jewel-toned walls, though the massive windows at the front of the store allowed in enough light to keep the space from feeling small. There were a few bistro tables lining the window, and a brightly lit pastry case that stretched down the length of the right-hand wall, ending just before two cash registers on the counter opposite the door. There were shelves of breads and ready-to-go baked goods lining the wall to Remus's left, but he turned his attention to the case, shuffling into the store a few steps at a time as he admired the selection. Bonbons, cookies, pastries, cakes, all beautifully decorated and displayed. By the time he reached the front, he was overwhelmed by the options. He straightened up, his mind spinning, to find the man behind the register watching him expectantly. The man had a mop of messy black hair, round glasses, and was wearing an apron emblazoned with the same "baked" as the sign out front in stitched calligraphy and a name tag that read James, followed by he/him.
See anything you like?
He asked with a friendly smile.
Too many things.
Remus admitted, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck.
I'm not sure I'll be able to decide.
Choose your top 3.
James said decidedly.
I'll charge you for whichever one you're most excited about.
Remus ended up walking away with a slice of flourless cake, a massive chocolate chip cookie, and a mini chocolate cheesecake, along with definite plans to return in the future. The next time Remus thought to visit Baked, he was indeed baked. He'd rolled himself a joint earlier that day to kick off his weekend, a prize for getting through the work week relatively unscathed. But it was only once the weed had taken full effect that he realized he was out of desserts. This was a problem because High Remus loved desserts even more than Sober Remus, and he typically made an effort to have something around for cases such as these. Luckily, there was a brand new bakery a mere 2 blocks from his apartment building, staffed by a very nice man who gave him free things. Confident, excited, and a bit woozy, Remus stuffed his socked feet into his favorite lime green Crocs and trotted out the door. When Remus strode through the door of Baked, accompanied once again by the sound of the bell, he found a new face staring back at him from the other side of the register. Suddenly, Remus forgot all about the double chocolate chunk salted caramel cookie he'd wanted to try, because he was being faced by an angel who was so beautiful that Remus couldn't entirely convince himself he wasn't hallucinating. The angel was wearing the same maroon apron that James had worn the last time Remus visited the shop over a gray Henley with the sleeves rolled up. He was decidedly glasses-less, and he had long black hair pulled into a braid that was curled over his shoulder.
The
man said.
Can I help you?
Remus wondered how long he'd been standing in the doorway with his mouth hanging open. He straightened up, blinking rapidly, and shuffled up to the register, only tripping over his Crocs once.
Cookie.
He managed, the cannabis in his system making the words thick and clumsy.
You don't wear glasses.
I don't know.
The man replied. Remus squinted at not James's name tag.
What kind of cookie did you want?
Serious, the name tag read, followed by they, them. Oh, Remus was a presumptive asshole.
Can't assume.
He blurted out. Sirius stared blankly at him.
You don't know.
I'm he.
Remus said, patting a hand on his chest. Belatedly, he realized Sirius had asked him a question about the cookie he'd come in to get.
Chocolate caramel, please. The cookie.
The corners of Sirius's lips twitched up.
All right, the one with salted caramel, right?
A small moan slipped out of Remus's mouth before he could stop it, imagining the swirl of salted caramel nestled in a rich, chewy chocolate cookie.
Yeah.
He sighed. He blinked, and then there was a bag with a warm cookie in it in his hand. Had he asked for it to be warmed up? Did he pay? And he was walking towards the exit. At the last second, he turned to wave to Sirius, maybe to say thank you, and stumbled into the closed door. He whipped around with an unintelligible mumble, cheeks heated, and slipped out without another word. Sirius watched the man duck out the door, bemused. He was lovely, really. All long limbs and tawny curls and freckles. The outline of his gray sweatpants suggested wonderful things about other parts of him. His behavior was a bit concerning, admittedly. Sirius didn't think he managed to get a full sentence out for the duration of their interaction, and he seemed flustered every time Sirius asked him a question. He'd fiddled non-stop with the strings of his faded hoodie with a flaking Weezer logo on it, except for when he'd patted his chest oddly and announced his pronouns mid-conversation.
Hey, Jim Jam.
Sirius called. There was a series of thumps, and then James stuck his head out from the kitchen.
Yes, beloved. Did you see the guy who just came in?
James shook his head, a light cloud of flour puffing out from his hair as he did so.
No. Should I have? He wasn't creepy, was he? No, just weird. His first comment was that I didn't wear glasses, so I assume he'd met you before. The name on his card was Remus.
Oh, James said, stepping fully into view. The rest of him was also coated in flour, and Sirius wasn't sure they wanted to know the state of the kitchen.
I remember Remus. He came in earlier this week. Nice guy. You thought he was weird.
Erratic, at least.
Maybe he was tired.
Sirius sighed, turning back to the register when the bell above the door chimed again, thinking back to dark brown doe eyes and how they were a little red, and they did have bruise-colored bags darkening the curve beneath them.
Yeah, maybe.
Remus ate his cookie, curled up on his couch with a purring cat in his lap, trying desperately to fill in the gaps of the conversation he'd had with Sirius. Had he flirted with them? Had he fucked up Sirius's pronouns out loud? And really, did he actually pay for the cookie that he was cradling like precious treasure, or had he just run away with it like a common thief? As he licked the excess chocolate off his fingers, Remus resolved that he would stop in the next day to explain the situation and make sure that, at the very least, the goods were paid for, and that he hadn't managed to offend or disrespect one of their employees. Remus's time came on Monday afternoon, when he was once again trudging home after an exhausting day of work, feeling utterly suffocated by his suit and tie, craving something sweet.
2 birds, 1 stone.
He thought hopefully, pushing open the door that led into the warm, cozy interior of Baked.
Hiya, Remus.
James called from the register. Remus deflated slightly in relief. At least he wouldn't have to face Sirius again so soon after humiliating himself. Remus lifted a hand in greeting, then began the same slow trek down the length of the pastry case that he'd done on his first visit, unsure what he wanted. He emerged at the end to request a slice of cookie dough cheesecake, and after James had packaged up the slice, Remus broached the topic that had been haunting him.
So last time I was in here,
He said nervously, fiddling with the end of his tie.
I was, a little out of it. There's no chance I walked out without paying, is there? Or possibly misgendered an employee?
James snorted, dark brows lifting behind his glasses.
Believe me, Remus, if you'd misgendered Sirius, they wouldn't have let you walk out unscathed, nor would they have let you go without paying.
Oh,
Remus said softly, tension bleeding from his shoulders.
that's good then.
Are you feeling better today?
James asked, handing Remus his cake and his receipt.
Yes, thank you.
Remus said with a weak laugh, ducking his head sheepishly.
Hopefully that's the last time I show up here in that state.
You're welcome in any state.
James replied, returning Remus's laugh with a more genuine one.
Sirius definitely wouldn't mind.
Remus felt his cheeks heat, and he couldn't fight the shy grin that tugged at his lips as he turned towards the door. Sirius braced themselves for working a cold, drizzly Saturday with a drink that had James hovering over their shoulder with a concerned look as Sirius pulled a third and fourth shot of espresso to add to the cup.
Do you need the day off, Pads?
Nope.
Uh-huh. Did you need a bigger cup? Looks like you just keep adding syrups.
Sirius sighed deeply as they squatted down to grab the milk.
Let me live, Prongs. I have a system.
Is the system giving yourself a heart condition?
Sirius ignored James in favor of finishing off the drink with an obscene amount of whipped cream. They'd been exhausted, mentally and emotionally, for the past 2 weeks, but coming into the bakery had been part of their routine since it had opened, and it served as a welcome change from the chaos of preparing for the opening, while subsequently watching a relationship of nearly 5 years fall to pieces. Now Sirius was single, on a schedule, and hadn't slept for more than 4 consecutive hours in recent memory. If they wanted a quad-shot latte with 3 flavors of syrup topped with whipped cream and sprinkles, they could damn well have one. Sirius told James as much as they stuck a straw through the domed lid of their cup.
All right.
James relented as Sirius wrapped their lips around the end of the straw.
But tell me if you need a break from the front, okay? I'll be on cakes for most of the day. Let me know if you want to swap.
You just don't want to decorate them.
Sirius said accusingly. James flung his hands in the air in response as he turned back to the kitchen.
Sue me for caring.
He sighed.
God forbid I want to help a friend.
There's another order for a bluey cake, isn't there?
There was a dull thud when James's forehead dropped against the doorframe as he leaned dramatically against it.
Why did we choose to offer custom cakes?
He whined.
That dog has been haunting my dreams, Pads.
I'll let you know if I need to swap.
Sirius said with a laugh.
Go have fun.
It was raining, and Remus didn't like to smoke around the cat, so he took a gummy after lunch and was just settling in to watch a new documentary on the Discovery Channel when he realized that, once again, he had no sweet treats to accompany him. His first thought was that he could run to the Walgreens down the block, but that thought was steamrolled by the memory of pale eyes and dark hair and a smooth tenor voice. And then Remus was pulling on his rain boots, green, knee-high, a gift from his mother, and his raincoat, black, knee-length, thrifted, to make his way to Baked. He paused before walking in this time, taking a deep breath and reminding himself to act normal before pushing open the door. Inside was warmly lit, a stark contrast to the dreariness outside, and Sirius stood behind the counter looking once again like an angel sent from heaven. They were wearing a turtleneck, the sleeves unfortunately pulled low, hiding delectable tattoo-covered forearms from view, and their hair was loose, hanging just past their shoulders and held back from their face with silver pins. They smiled when they saw Remus, and he breathed out a soft sigh of relief as he returned the gesture with a smile of his own.
Welcome back,
Sirius called.
Thanks.
Remus replied. He blinked manually and turned to the pastry case. He took a few steps closer so he didn't have to talk as loud, fearing that he'd disrupt the people at the tables near the window.
I don't know what I want.
Sorry.
Sirius tilted their head, so Remus closed the gap between him and the counter before repeating.
I don't know what I want.
Now that he was closer, he realized he didn't actually know how loud he was speaking.
Am I shouting?
No,
Sirius said with a slightly confused laugh.
I can barely hear you, honestly.
Huh.
Remus turned to stare blankly at the pastry case again, then looked back to Sirius.
I don't know what I want.
You said that already.
Oh,
Remus smacked his lips together. His mouth was obscenely dry. Gummies always did that to him.
I'm thirsty.
Sirius raised an eyebrow.
4.
Remus opened his mouth to answer honestly, water, and then belatedly registered the attempt at flirting and chose to switch halfway to you. Naturally, what came out was,
Whoa.
Sirius gave him a strange look, then turned to yell over their shoulder.
Prongs.
The sudden change in volume made Remus jump, and he straightened up, fearful of whatever it was Sirius may be calling for. In no time at all, however, James appeared. Remus knew James. James was safe. He smiled.
Hi.
2 curious pairs of eyes landed on him in unison, one chocolate brown and the other steely gray, and he wondered how loud he'd said that. He tried again, this time in a whisper.
Hi.
James gave him a curious once-over. He had blue icing on his cheek.
Remus.
He said cordially.
My guy, your eyes are red as hell right now.
Remus winced. He thought briefly about closing them, but no, he needed them to see.
Are they?
Yeah.
James said with a laugh.
What did you take?
A gummy.
Remus said sheepishly, staring down at his rain boots. He scuffed the toe of one against the wood floor.
Sorry.
He chanced to look back up to see James wave a dismissive hand as he replied.
We've all been there. What can we get you?
Remus stared, open-mouthed, at the tray of brownies that James pulled out for him to examine. Any lingering trepidation regarding the man's strange behavior had faded with the revelation that the man was simply a lightweight, so Sirius let themselves relax and admire as James talked him through the flavor options. While Remus and James chatted, Sirius took in Remus's eyes, the heavy lids and the way his irises glowed amber in the bakery's warm light. Sirius didn't miss the way they kept flicking over to them, or the way his lashes fluttered nervously when Sirius met his gaze, a small smirk playing at the corner of their lips. Somehow, despite the hooded raincoat, Remus's hair was damp from the rain outside and starting to frizz. It shifted with every movement of his head, and Sirius desperately wanted to thread their fingers through it, comb it back, and lick up the raindrops that were sliding down Remus's jaw. They wanted to peel the stupidly long raincoat off him, offended on both their behalfs that it was covering up such deliciously long legs. Once Remus finally managed to stammer out his request for a peanut butter brownie, Sirius hip-checked James out of the way to pull Remus's attention back to them.
Still thirsty?
They asked, cocking their head and offering Remus a sickeningly sweet smile. They heard James sigh from where he was returning the brownie tray to the case. Remus's mouth worked wordlessly for a few seconds, his gaze flashing frantically from James to Sirius to the ground, then back to Sirius.
Yes.
Give the man a break.
James scolded Sirius as he straightened up.
You can flirt with him when he's sober.
Remus's cheeks grew an even darker shade of pink than they already were, and he ducked his head to tap his card to the reader.
Oh, he can take it. He's a big boy.
Sirius continued stubbornly. They leaned their elbows on the counter next to the register and rested their chin in their hands.
Aren't you?
Remus tried once, twice, 3 times to fit his card back in his wallet before dropping them both on the ground. He stared down at them as he mumbled sadly.
I don't know how to answer that.
James smacked Sirius over the back of the head and quickly rounded the counter to help Remus.
Ignore them.
He said kindly, tucking Remus's card into his wallet and handing it to him.
They're just grateful you're not a creep.
Remus took his wallet back and turned to Sirius with wide, desperate eyes as he said,
No, God, I'm sorry. No, you're really pretty and...
You think I'm pretty?
Serious.
handsome.
Oh, go on, what else?
Serious.
Sirius sighed and relented with a casual wave of their hand.
Fine. Remus, come back when you're sober and you can ask me out. Better yet.
They spun around and grabbed a cup, scribbled their name and number on it, then filled it with water and ice before handing it to a still wide-eyed Remus.
Text me when you're feeling better.
Remus accepted the cup with a shaky hand, immediately lifted it for a hasty swig of water, then lowered it to swipe away what had dribbled out of the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand. He never broke eye contact with Sirius, and Sirius found themselves locked in on the way. Remus's throat worked as he swallowed.
Thanks.
Remus croaked finally.
I will text you.
James rolled his eyes, muttered something about returning to bluey hell, and disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving a smug Sirius behind to watch Remus shamble towards the door. Remus took the better part of a week to text Sirius. At first, he didn't even put the number in his phone. Once the cup was empty, he set it on his coffee table, stared at the number scrawled on it very hard every time he walked by, but couldn't get himself to act on it. When Shrimpy knocked the cup off the coffee table, as he was wont to do, Remus threw a few coins in it to weigh it down. When Shrimpy knocked the cup off again, hard enough to send the coins scattering across the hardwood floor, Remus moved the cup to a higher surface on top of the fridge. And when Shrimpy found his way to the top of the fridge and smacked the cup so it landed directly on Remus's head, Remus caved and added a new contact to his phone. 2 days later, with a glass of wine in hand and decidedly no weed in his system, he finally got up the courage to do something with it.
Hello waving emoji, this is Remus. From the bakery. You wrote your number on my cup.
Hiya, Remus. I was starting to think you lost the cup. Eyes emoji.
Oh, definitely not. It's my cat's new favorite toy.
First of all, why do you still have the cup? Second of all, I know you're not going to say that and not send me a picture of said cat.
Remus chewed nervously at his bottom lip as he watched the text stream in, then looked up at the sound of a clatter from across the room. He hadn't been exaggerating when he said Shrimpy was fond of the cup. He would have thrown it out after putting Sirius's number in his phone if it hadn't been for Shrimpy staring up at him and yowling pitifully as he carried it to the trash can. And now Shrimpy was pouncing on the cup as it rolled away, smacking it, then pouncing again, crossing the room in odd little leaps and bounds. After a beat of hesitation, noting that the 3 dots by Sirius's name had stopped, he lifted his phone to take a video, just 20 seconds or so of Shrimpy's intricate dance with the cup. He sent it off, followed by,
He wouldn't let me throw it out. Tell me you could say no to this.
Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Point taken. Cat aside, how are you feeling? Sober. Brave.
Is that a leading question? 1.5 glasses of wine tipsy, but more sober than you've seen me. Did you want me to wait to ask you out next time I came in? Or can I do it over text?
the dots by Sirius's name popped up, bobbing on the screen as Sirius typed, then disappeared. They started again, then went away after a few seconds. No new texts came through. Then a phone call. Sirius baked calling.
Hello?
Remus. Lovely to hear your voice.
Sirius purred.
You too?
Remus stuttered out. He shifted in his seat on the couch and tucked his feet underneath him.
Braver over text, huh?
Remus let out a strangled laugh.
Believe it or not, Sirius, I don't make a habit out of getting numbers from cute employees and then asking them out.
He heard a tiny huff of breath.
Relationship guy.
Not an anything guy, really.
Remus admitted.
I don't get flirted with that often.
Liar.
Remus pressed a hand to one flushed cheek.
I'm not worth the attention, believe me.
I don't believe that for a second.
Sirius scoffed.
Ask me out, I'll prove you wrong.
Are you daring me to ask you out?
You're the one who kept stumbling into my shop high off your ass. The least you could do is be the one to properly ask.
Well then,
Remus said. He cleared his throat.
Sirius, what's your last name?
Black.
Sirius Black, would you allow me the honor of taking you out to dinner?
Funny you should ask, Remus.
Lupin.
Remus Loop. Really?
Don't.
A heavy sigh gusted over the line before Sirius composed themselves and said imperiously,
Funny thing you should ask, Remus Lupin. I would love to.
Remus approached Baked 5 minutes before close that Friday, when the stars were just beginning to peek out in the dimness of the evening sky. He'd stopped at the florist next door first, where a very nice man named Frank helped Remus pick out a tasteful yet affordable first date sort of bouquet. He hovered awkwardly outside the door and smoothed down the front of his nicest cable-knit sweater once more before stepping inside. James's head snapped up at the sound of the bell, and he had half a customer service smile on his face before he realized who had come in. His smile eased into something more genuine, and he raised a hand to greet Remus.
We're almost done. Sirius is in the back.
No rush.
James nodded to the flowers in Remus's hand.
Are those for them?
Yeah, is that?
A spike of fear ran through Remus at James's mildly amused tone.
Is that okay? Oh God, they're not allergic or anything.
No.
James rushed to assure him.
They're very nice. Sirius will love them. Speaking of, Padfoot.
He hollered the last word over his shoulder in the direction of the kitchen. There was a series of thumps, slamming doors, muttered curses, and then Sirius stormed through the kitchen door in all their glory.
What prongs? I almost fucked up my...
They pulled up short, their sentence stuttering to a halt, when they caught sight of Remus on the other side of the counter.
Hi.
They breathed, voice suddenly softening. Their gaze flashed down to the flowers in Remus's hand, and Remus watched their cheeks flush. Sirius must be wearing platforms, because Remus was fairly certain they'd been the same height the last time he'd been in, but they now towered over James and Remus. Their broad shoulders were hugged by a fitted, long-sleeved mock-neck top, and Remus had seen the swish of a skirt when they'd walked out. There were about 2 inches of bare skin between the skirt and the top that Remus was trying very hard to not stare at, so instead he stared at Sirius's eyes, which were now outlined with charcoal black smudges of eyeliner, highlighting the specks of blue and green amidst their otherwise silver irises. He could see shimmer highlighting their cheekbones, and their lips were glossy. Silver earrings ran up the curve of each ear. He refocused on their eyes.
I did tell James there was no rush.
He said weakly,
I'm happy to wait if you need more. Not that you need. You look amazing. But I don't want to rush you.
Oh my God.
James cut in.
Go. Both of you. Sirius, you look fine. Remus, I'm worried you'll faint if you keep working yourself up. Shoo.
He flapped his hands at Sirius until they rounded the counter. Watching Sirius come into full view was even more disarming, and Remus could do nothing but stare dumbly as he took in the maroon-heeled docks, the black leather knee-length pleated skirt that revealed well-defined calves coated in dark hair, the matching black shirt that, upon closer look, did nothing to hide the outline of a nipple ring. There was a thin trail of hair peeking between the bottom of the shirt and the top of the skirt. Remus forced his eyes upward and thrust out the bouquet.
Flowers.
So they are.
Sirius hummed.
For decoration or…
For you.
Sirius accepted the bouquet graciously with a heavily ringed hand and dipped their head to smell it before James rushed forward to take them, promising to put the flowers in water for them once he got home. Then Sirius brushed past Remus to pull open the door with their free hand and wave him through.
After you.
Remus thanked every deity he could think of when he managed to get all the way through the door without tripping. They spent the 5 blocks walking to the Italian bistro that Remus had suggested, chatting idly, and Sirius was delighted to find that they slipped easily into a natural rhythm. Remus seemed much less distracted with a path to focus on, rather than the slivers of skin that Sirius had left visible to taunt him. Remus's hands were tucked into the pockets of his neatly pressed gray trousers while they walked, which meant Sirius couldn't brush their hand up against his, maybe coax him into tangling their fingers together, but at least they could look. It was noticeable how differently Remus held himself when he wasn't high. He still slumped, but he had a quiet confidence about him that made him seem taller. His eyes were bright and clear, still the same beautifully deep brown, but without the tinge of red. The curls that had previously been mussed and frizzy were tamed into neat waves that framed his face, and he was wearing a well-fitted forest green sweater, the collar of a crisp white button-down peeking over the top. The outfit was neater and cleaner than anything Sirius had seen him in before. Remus nudged Sirius out of the way once they arrived to pull open the door of the restaurant, then stepped aside to allow Sirius in first. Once they were settled at a small candle-lit table by a window facing the street, Sirius said bluntly,
So I have to ask.
About.
The weed habit.
Remus winced and fiddled with his napkin as he said sheepishly,
It's really not a habit, I swear. I indulge on weekends if I've had a bad week, but I usually have snacks on hand.
Realization dawned, and Sirius let out a sharp bark of laughter before slapping a hand over their mouth when the sound reverberated in the comparatively quiet space. They leaned over the table and hissed.
You came in because you had the fucking munchies.
I like sweets,
Then go to the store for a Kit Kat.
but I like your sweets.
Remus protested. The waiter chose that moment, naturally, to come up and introduce themselves. Remus wilted in his chair, and Sirius bit back a snicker.
We should probably churn through some standard first date questions.
Sirius said over the rim of their glass, half filled with a Sauvignon Blanc. Remus wrinkled his nose as he set down his cocktail, a cranberry Moscow Mule that had come in one of those ridiculous copper mugs that announced to the restaurant what you'd ordered.
Do we have to?
We can't call it a first date until we've gone through the horrifying ordeal of asking each other the most tedious questions imaginable.
Sirius argued.
It's tradition.
Fine.
Remus sighed. He leaned forward, bracing his elbows on the table.
What do you do for work?
Asshole.
Remus grinned. Sirius quite liked his grin. His teeth were slightly off-white in a tea-stained sort of way, and his canines were a bit crooked, but he had dimples in both cheeks, and the smile took over his whole face, brightening his eyes.
Now you.
Sirius cocked their head, toying with a strand of hair that had been strategically left out of their bun.
What do you do for work, wolf boy?
I work an incredibly tedious office job that serves no real meaning to society.
He replied flatly.
Isn't this fun?
Any siblings?
Sirius, please.
Answer it, ask me back, and you'll unlock personal law like never before, I swear.
Remus sat back in his seat as their waiter set down their food, and after they both murmured soft thank yous, he said,
Only child. You?
Well,
Sirius said thoughtfully, stabbing their fork into their eggplant parmesan.
James is the closest thing to what I would consider a brother, since my biological brother disappeared off the face of the earth after he graduated, 2 years after I ran away from home.
They popped a fork full of food in their mouth while Remus stared at them, his own fork hovering in midair while his mouth hung open. Remus said.
I feel boring compared to you.
Sirius tipped their head back with a loud, delighted laugh.
Of all the things people have said to me,
They gasped out.
in response to that information, that is my new favorite.
Remus's cheeks flushed as he ducked down to take a bite of food. The candlelight turned his blush into a burnished golden glow, and Sirius said as much. They watched, mildly besotted, as Remus fumbled his fork in response and dropped it into his dish of pasta, splashing his sweater with sauce. He sighed deeply.
Sirius, you're going to be the death of me.
Or,
Sirius cooed, pressing their elbow into the table and setting their chin in their hand.
tell me more.
I mean,
Remus huffed, dabbing at his sweater with his napkin.
in 30 years, I've never met someone so beautiful and so dynamic, and never would I ever think that you'd be interested in me. The first time I walked into your shop, I genuinely thought you were an angel. I thought I'd finally hit my limit, and I was actively hallucinating. And then you were so sweet, no pun intended, and I made such a fool of myself. I was terrified to come back, but I couldn't stop myself. And yeah, I told myself it was for the sweets. But you're right, Kit Kats are cheaper and easier to get, and I think really, I was just hoping for another excuse to see your eyes.
He finished with another deep sigh, finally tossing his napkin aside in resignation. His shoulders slumped forward and his chin dipped down, the epitome of embarrassment. Sirius, for once, was the one left speechless.
Please say something.
Remus muttered. Sirius blinked rapidly, then blurted out,
Do you want to get out of here?
Takeout containers in hand, Remus and Sirius conferred briefly before determining that Remus's was closer and heading there. The walk was quiet, but the air between them was thick with anticipation. Their shoulders brushed together, and every glance between them was heated. By the time they reached Remus's walk-up, Remus found himself fumbling with his keys while Sirius's hand pressed against his lower back.
Okay,
He breathed out once he was inside.
we made it. Hello, sir.
Shrimpy yowled in return, weaved between Remus's ankles, sniffed briefly at Sirius, then trotted back to the kitchen with another chirp, presumably leading them to his empty food bowl.
Shrimps. I fed you when I left. Yes, you're very cute, but no, you may not have more, because you're on a diet.
He looked up to find Sirius looking between him and his cat, following their one-sided conversation with apparent amusement.
Sorry.
He mumbled.
Bad habits.
This is one of the cutest things I've ever witnessed.
Sirius said firmly.
Can he have treats?
Remus ran a hand through his curls and gestured warily to the cabinet that held all of Shrimpy's food and treats.
In there. Not too many. He really is on a diet.
Sirius nodded, then bent to unlace and peel off their boots before trotting into Remus's kitchen with the ease of someone who'd been living there for years. They fit surprisingly well into the space, surrounded by shabby furniture, slightly messy countertops, and patterned kitchen towels with fall leaves and cats on them. They pulled out a bag labeled Cheesy Craze and shook it, snickering when Shrimpy spun around to stare at them.
What a cutie.
Sirius cooed, dropping into a squat.
You take after your dad, don't you? Don't you?
Remus's date and his cat bonded in record time, Shrimpy accepting treats out of Sirius's palm while Sirius shifted into a cross-legged position on the floor. Remus kicked off his own shoes and shucked off his jacket.
I'm starting to think this was an elaborate ploy to steal my cat.
Remus joked weakly as Shrimpy crawled over Sirius's skirt to climb onto their thigh, nudging his nose at their now empty hand.
Oh, you don't. You can move him. I don't want him to fuck up your skirt.
I was hoping you would fuck up my skirt.
Sirius quipped, raising an eyebrow up at Remus as they ran a hand down Shrimpy's back.
It's not a ploy, just to be clear. You're very cute, even though I thought you might be some kind of crazy after the first time you came in. You and your Crocs and your big doe eyes, and you're so kind.
They said it as if they couldn't quite believe the fact, but were pleased by it nonetheless.
I try to be.
Remus murmured, staring down at his socked feet, shuffling them against the floor. There was a hole in the big toe of the left one, and he quickly stomped his other foot over it to hide it, wincing at the force of his toe being mashed under his heel.
Wine.
He squeaked.
Oh yes, please.
Sirius agreed. They scooped Shrimpy into their arms before standing, and Remus found that he was slightly soothed by them once again, being the same height.
You don't mind if I go through your records, do you? I saw them on our way in.
Help yourself.
Remus walked into the living room with 2 glasses of wine to find Sirius squatting in front of his record player, while Shrimpy sat next to them with dog-like loyalty. The opening notes of his Wasteland Baby album rang out a few seconds later, and Sirius fiddled briefly with the volume before joining Remus on the couch and accepting the glass of wine that he handed them.
Thank you.
Sirius hummed. They flung their legs over his lap, and Shrimpy hopped up after them, settling himself in the divot between Sirius's shins.
If you were coming here for sex, I'm sorry to say you may have to wait a bit.
Remus laughed.
This home operates on the cat's schedule.
I don't mind.
Sirius said softly. They reached a hand across the back of the couch, letting their fingers graze his shoulder.
I think I'd be happy sitting on this couch with you all night. And anyways, I'm not one for quick and dirty hookups anymore.
Anymore.
We never finished our first date questions.
Remus accepted the deflection for what it was.
What did you study in school?
Christ, I forgot how boring first dates are supposed to be.
Sirius grumbled.
All right. I studied business management and finance. And no, I did not enjoy either of them. I much preferred my time in France at culinary school.
You speak French.
Wouldn't you like to know?
Remus glared balefully at Shrimpy, who was now fully asleep on top of the person that Remus would very much like to kiss. Sirius nudged his shoulder.
Why do you work a boring office job?
What do you mean?
Remus asked, glancing back up at them.
You said you work a boring office job, but you don't seem like the type.
What do I seem like?
Sirius hummed in thought and gave Remus a once-over, while their hands snaked further up his shoulder, settling at the base of his neck.
Bookish, I think. You dress like a professor.
Remus frowned down at his outfit.
Oh,
It works for you.
Sirius said, plucking at his collar.
Why aren't you a professor, Wolfie McWolferson? What did you study at school?
Shrimpy snuffled in his sleep, and Remus rested a hand on his head while he decided how he wanted to answer. His thumb stroked an idle line from the bridge of Shrimpy's nose up to the spot between his eyes, drawing a sleepy purr from him.
would you like a gummy?
He asked Sirius.
I don't like to smoke around Shrimpy.
Drugging me on the first date. Very classy.
If you want an answer to your question, I can't be sober for it.
Remus retorted with a wry grin.
And at least we'd be on even footing for once.
Sirius gave him an appraising look, then nodded decidedly.
Go on then.
They waved their hand in Remus's face, palm up.
Gummy me.
2 raspberry gummies later, Remus was slumped over in his seat, eyes half closed, listening to Sirius ramble about the recipes they were testing. He rested one hand on the ankle that was still draped over his lap. Shrimpy was still fast asleep on Sirius's legs, and they petted him idly while their other hand gesticulated as they talked.
It's got brown butter in the crust, which is a pain in my ass to make. I don't have the patience. One time I tried to actually wait and ended up ruining one of our few nice pans. We used to not have as many, but my uncle died and now we have a whole bakery. But I couldn't get the butter off the bottom. It was like concrete, absolutely immovable. Trashed a $400 pan because I tried to brown butter. And now you may be asking Sirius, why the hell would you intentionally be putting it in a recipe? And that's because James, contrary to his general nature, does have the patience to brown butter without burning it to a crisp. Does that make sense?
Huh?
The brown butter conundrum.
Oh, yes.
Remus said, nodding eagerly. He hoped it made him seem like he'd successfully followed Sirius's tangent.
Butter. Good stuff. Do you have any?
Butter.
Desserts.
Where would I be storing spare desserts?
Sirius gestured to their outfit.
I have exactly enough room in the pocket of this skirt for my phone, wallet, and keys. I was going to take my jacket, but then you wouldn't be able to see all of this, and I thought that was a shame. So I decided I could get away with being a little chilly for the sake of aesthetics. Do you like my outfit?
The skirt is good.
Some people are weird about the skirt.
No, I like it. Lots of, skin.
Skin.
It's nice skin, but the tattoos.
Remus said sadly. He reached out to lay a hand on Sirius's forearm, which rested against the back of the couch.
I miss them. I only saw them once.
Sirius perked up, and they started tugging at their sleeve before pausing, shaking their head firmly.
Tattoo tour later. You were supposed to tell me about your tragic past, I assume. Not everyone has a tragic past. Did you know that? When you grow up with one, you sort of assume everyone has something. But James has nothing. 2 loving parents and everything. I couldn't even get one. But James tells me it's not because I'm not lovable.
You're a chatty stoner.
Remus said, smiling dopily.
I like it.
Sirius gave him a stern look.
Trauma, go.
Serious.
Remus whined.
I want a cookie, and I want to kiss you. But I think the cookie might have to come first.
Shrimpy is asleep.
Sirius insisted.
I'll text James to bring us cookies if you tell me what we had to get high for you to tell me.
Fine.
Remus huffed, dropping his gaze to stare at his lap.
Highlights, real. I started school for education, then sophomore year, Got in a drunk driving accident with my mum. Mum died. I didn't. Dad hates me for it. Ended up with a metal plate in my skull and metal rods in my leg, which is when I started with my so-called weed habit to help with the pain. Went to community college a little later to scrape together an associate's degree, then got a job that would pay me enough to let me get out of my house.
He chanced to look back up to find Sirius staring at him, mouth open, their phone held loosely in their hands.
I thought you said you were boring, Tin Man.
Remus let out a helpless giggle, covering his mouth with his hand. The sound bubbled into a louder, uncontrollable laugh, one with wheezing and snorting that he could never hide when he was in this state. He kept his hands clamped over his mouth to try and tamp down the worst of it, but Sirius leaned forward to tug it away, a peal of giggles spilling out of their mouth.
No, don't hide from me. You're so cute.
Shrimpy didn't appreciate the movement, and he leapt out of Sirius' lap with a disgruntled. After being startled awake, they took half a second to mumble apologies in his general direction before Sirius turned back to Remus, seizing the opportunity to clamber fully into his lap and wind their arms around his neck.
I didn't text James.
Sirius said through a giggle, the words spilling between Remus's lips.
You don't have any cookies.
No,
Remus wheezed, the laughter finally fading into a face-stretching grin.
but I can. Can we do the kiss first, please?
He gazed hopefully at Sirius.
Maybe. Could we kiss? And then I could see your tattoos, and tomorrow we can go get cookies.
That sounds like a fantastic plan.
Sirius said happily, beaming down at Remus. Their hair had been freed from a bun at some point and was hanging in a loose curtain around their face. Remus lifted his hands to push it out of the way, threading his fingers through silky black curls.
Pretty.
Remus mumbled.
And sweeter than cookies, I bet.
Sap.
Sirius huffed, a pink flush creeping along their cheeks. Remus sat up to press a soft kiss to the corner of their mouth, and when Sirius turned their head to slot their lips together, he knew his bet had been right.
And that one.
Sirius tilted their head to find the tattoo Remus was pointing to. His head was resting on Sirius's bare thigh, cheek pressed against the hinge of their hip, and his fingertips were ghosting along Sirius's ribs. Sirius was sprawled out in bed, one hand tangled in Remus's hair.
The constellations.
Yeah, which ones are they?
Canis Major for me, Leo for my brother.
Remus pressed his fingers more firmly against the inked stars, before squirming up to nuzzle against the warm skin, nipping lightly at a spot between their ribs. They sank deeper into the mattress with a soft sigh as Remus sucked the mark into their skin, and when he pulled away, there was a reddened mark just over the brightest of the stars.
I like that one the best.
He said thoughtfully, tapping it with his index finger.
Cute.
Sirius murmured.
It likes you too.
Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic, composed by Burning Aurora, Kaliana, and Flowerhawk.